Previously on But Make It Gucci, it was revealed the ensemble thought to be the child of Gucci's 2018 resort collection, and this 1971 vintage pattern was actually the secret love child of Gucci and the late 15th century Italian Renaissance. Gucci's creative director Alessandro Michele and his twin, Jared Leto, discovered they may have a third brother. No, that's future Jess's problem. Yeah, this guy. Okay, actually I made a mauve base layer dress that was a combination of this pattern and a 1480's camicia and a Renaissance corset made from an old Metallica t-shirt. I'm using this project as a way to explore the similarities between the Italian Renaissance and modern fashion using Gucci's 2018 resort collection, which was heavily influenced by the Italian Renaissance, among many other things, as a lens. I appreciate Alessandro's tongue-in-cheek approach to fashion, and this collection in particular really challenged the space of authenticity, sometimes blurring that line. Perhaps not so much knockoff monogrammed handbags, but the fashion system of the Italian Renaissance was also highly concerned with the authentic representation of virtue through sartorial means. Sumptuary laws dictated in extreme detail which class of person could wear what, and clothing was so extravagant it made up entire estates. This is important for this part of the project, as we're getting very close to something we cannot ignore if we're concerning ourselves with Alessandro's Gucci and the Italian Renaissance embellishments. In this video, we'll first make the outer layer of this look, based very loosely on this pattern and much more firmly on this look from Gucci and an Italian Renaissance giornea. A giornea is a loose, sleeveless outer gown worn on top of a tighter fitting gamora and white linen camicia. That's the mauve satin / Metallica t-shirt conglomeration I made last video. The giornea wasn't really a practical garment. It was used almost solely as a voluminous space to display sumptuous textiles, aka the virtue currency of the Italian Renaissance. Gucci's look, which I think more closely emulates a camicia, gown, and zamara of the mid-16th century, appears to be black velvet, and it has this sequined snake, I think, on the front, and this flowery embroidery here. Mine will be a black velvet vest, also with some type of embellishment. Okay, first things first, let's get the giornea caught up to the two garments from the first video. I used the same pattern I made for the mauve dress from the first video, with the flare included rather than added later via gores. You may recognize this velvet. It's the leftovers from the dress I made earlier this year, which I absolutely did not cut with the intention of making another garment out of it. I had to do some conspicuous piecing down the front and at the back to make the pattern fit, but I'm pretty pleased with myself at getting a second garment out of this fabric. Sustainability, yes, but also, hey, free vest. First things first, I sewed all of the pieced bits and the back neck darts while I was at it. I then sewed the two back panels together and side panels, and we now have a mauve dress, a corset, and the giornea ready for embellishment. Let's start with the mauve dress, whose hem I did finish, by the way, with a hem facing which is similar to how a hem may have been finished in the 1480s. I really enjoy the way Alessandro Michele constantly references kitsch in his work, but makes it feel modern, fresh. With this and the Renaissance penchant for elaborate trims in mind, I used oversized rickrack as my main trim for the mauve dress. I'm sure this can be sewn by machine, but I attached mine by first basting, then going back in and tacking all the slopes in place. Next, each valley got a small pearl. I included rickrack at the neck, wrist, and hem, but I left the pearls off of the hem, since those would likely get caught on everything. The corset already has trim, and I couched a gold cord to the edges of this to help it pop. My couching always looks wonky while I'm doing it, but then I pull it taut at the end. I added pearls and agate beads to the front trim, avoiding the sides since beads would be covered by the arm and get caught in the lacing. The Gucci collection features tons of Renaissance-themed motifs, but also quite a few Greek motifs as well. Snakes seem to be one of the coded motifs of Gucci, and they're of course important to just about every culture, including both Renaissance and Greek. All this to say, there were many options of embellishment motifs. I poured through tons of Renaissance paintings and extant textiles looking for inspiration. I tried different scales and mock-ups, but I kept coming back to that bird. I mean, why fight it? When a bejeweled bird is looking you in the face, just accept it. I didn't really care about my version being 100% accurate, obviously, so I freehanded the design onto the velvet in metallic ink, very specifically the best way I've found to mark onto dark-colored velvet. I played around with different techniques and materials, but when I realized my playing around had become an entire wing, I decided on Swarovski Zillion beads. Quick note, I've had these beads for years after purchasing them to test out materials prior to a collaboration with Swarovski, but I've never actually beaded anything before, so this is a new skill for me. Also, a flat-backed bead or even hot fix may have been a better option for this application. Okay, let's talk about historical embroidery for a moment. During the Renaissance and beyond, a garment destined for embroidery would first have both the pattern and the embroidery pattern marked onto the fabric in chalk or ink. The entire piece of uncut fabric would then be stretched onto an embroidery frame, and the embroidery worked first thing. Having done this before, I can attest this is the simplest way to do a large-scale embroidery. The square piece of fabric is much easier to secure to the frame. You can really get the fabric secure and taut without worrying about it popping out of a hoop. You don't have to worry about excess fabric getting caught in the embroidery, and if you embroider a piece after cutting out the pattern, you run the risk of frayed edges. All of that was never going to happen for this project, since my fabric wasn't a nice tidy square to start with. But I do wish I had maybe hoop embroidered prior to cutting out the pattern. My thought was that cotton velvet frays less than other fabrics, and if I embroidered the piece as a garment rather than as fabric, I could potentially embroider over the seams. It's fine. All's well that ends well. But I feel like I spent more time fighting all of the excess fabric and retensioning the fabric than actually embroidering. Anyway, just a word of caution. I used couched gold cord and silver cord for the details and accents. The flames, is that what's happening here? Were couched gold cord and small copper seed beads. One of the main differences between Renaissance and modern embroidery is that Renaissance tends to be intricate, extremely detailed, and to work with both the textile and the silhouette in a way that it all sort of melts together. Whereas modern embroidery tends to be more graphic and bold, with the embellishment being the takeaway for the look. Mary obviously has a lot more going on with her sleeve, which is magnificent in its own right, but I wanted something more modern for this project. The Gucci collection features classic laurel wreaths around some models' heads, and I've also been fascinated by the classical and early modern fascination with laurel. Laurel is frequently featured in Botticelli's work, which frequently echoes mythological scenes. See what I did there? Of course we have Venus here in all her glory, but we also have the Hora of Spring with a wreath of laurel around her neck. This may or may not be a play on the name Lorenzo Medici. Regardless, laurel has long been symbolic of power and achievement, but also of artistry and poetry. I again drew this freehand directly on the form this time. Laurel is typically shown as a deep green, with consistently sized and shaped leaves. I started with a template for the leaves, but I don't think this was necessary in the end. Okay, so I've also never worked with sequins before, and let me just say, it's much harder than you might expect. I chose to work with sequin strips because I thought it would be easier. Keeping those strips straight was difficult. I ended up with a sort of beading, kind of couching technique. I've since done more research, and next time I do any sort of beading or spangling, I think I'll try using a tambour needle. I'll also note that Gucci's sequins are intentionally sporadic, so pinpoint precision wasn't my goal here. My tip for full ensemble embellishment like this is to constantly step back and look at the pieces together and individually. I sewed the shoulder seam and I thought I was done here, but the two sets of embellishment on the vest looked estranged from one another. I countered this by adding more laurel in a wreath below the bird, and also some light rays above the laurel at the shoulder. This lining is super cheap acetate, which smelled like death when ironed, but the color is beautiful and perfect, so there you go. I sewed the darts and seams of the lining. I then placed it right sides together with the main piece, and sewed around the armholes to clean finish the edges. Such naivety. Yeah, you can't finish two armholes this way at the same time. You won't be able to turn the piece right side out. Embarrassing how long it took me to realize something I absolutely already knew. After rage unpicking the stitches, I decided to finish the armholes with a bias binding, as I'd already decided to do for the center front. I laid the lining into the main piece wrong sides together. I laid a 2-inch bias strip of the velvet along the edge and sewed along the seam allowance. I then flipped the binding over the raw edge, turned the seam allowance inwards, and fell stitched it in place. The hem was finished by sewing a fuchsia velvet ribbon along the raw edge on the right side, flipping that ribbon to the inside, and felling it over the lining. Be careful if you try this. If your lining is too long, the self will bag, and vice versa. So it's done, finished, the hem's done, all the seams are done. But I don't know, I feel like there's just something unbalanced about the whole thing, like something is missing. I think I know what it is. What is fashion, or what is it that gives a piece of clothing the right to be called fashion? And why is it that fashion is tied so tightly to status? I think these are some of the many questions Alessandro was asking with this and maybe most of his collections. Is this an outfit I can throw on to go to the grocery store? I mean, sure, but I probably won't. That's the thing about fashion, Gucci especially. Altogether, it can be a lot, bit costumey even. But what makes Gucci so successful is that beneath the layers and layers of sequins and lurex are pretty wearable separates. If you've enjoyed this exploration of authenticity and excess, historical and modern fashion, give the video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. We've got a couple of fun short videos coming up and a nice meaty project next month. Bye! No comment necessary.